Hi, everyone. Welcome to our third Lunch and Learn of the term. This is our final one for the semester. As always, I am going to thank you for coming. I know that we're all very busy and we're also ready for spring break, so doing one more thing can feel a little bit stressful. So thank you for showing up. And since this is our last one of the term, I'm going to invite you to reach out to me, isabel.alicia@cuny.edu. I'll put my email in the chat and let me know what topics you would like me to cover next term. So as you know, I'm the Associate Director for the Psychology Program. This is a lunch and learn that focuses on how to read research. So it's useful not just for psychology students, but for all students who might use peer-reviewed research during their careers. And also it's useful for you in terms of skills for your life in general. And that's simply because you may find yourself in a position of caring for a loved one who is suffering from some sort of disorder that requires you to have a better understanding of the disorder. And as a result, you may look to research to learn more about it. I know for me, that's been something that's very important, knowing how to access the research, knowing how to read it for myself. Because we hear people say, I did my own research, but no, you don't have to do your own research. There's a wealth of research that's out there already, and you can read it and learn it and understand it. And in many cases, it's peer reviewed, meaning that a panel of experts have looked at it. And so, that you can count on it a little bit. All right. So I'm starting off at the Newman Library homepage. And as always, I'm clicking on databases. So for those of you who've seen me do a lunch and learn before, this is often where I start off because this is where we need to start. We start at the library. I'm a second generation CUNY graduate, and one of the things that I remember when I first started at CUNY, my mom telling me, my mom's a Brooklyn College grad, go Brooklyn, and she said to me, we pay for the resources both as taxpayers and also as students, so we should use them. And so I used to spend a lot of time at the library when I was a student here at CUNY, and that's because we have fantastic libraries, wonderful resources, and once again, we pay for them, we should use them. All right, so here I'm going to databases because we are doing a psychology focused lunch and learn. I'm going to go to APA PsycInfo, and that's going to be the American Psychological Association's database that keeps all peer-reviewed articles, also just all articles that are associated with psychology. If you are in something related to education, you might go to ERIC. If you're in a field that's related to anthropology, you might go to Anthosource. There's a wide variety of different databases and a lot of really cool stuff. Maybe one day what we'll do is we'll do a lunch and learn where we just go through databases and I show you, how you can look up like vintage articles of Vogue magazine to the library. You can do that. You can look at old issues of Ebony. Just a wide variety of really fun things are available through the library. But we're going down to PsycInfo. So we're clicking on APA PsycInfo. This should be your primary source for looking at, this should be your primary source for looking at, sorry, I'm gonna momentarily stop sharing my screen, but this should be your primary source for looking for peer-reviewed articles. Now with midterms, you're probably thinking to yourself, I need to find something extra that will really make my paper stand out. And so one of the things that makes your paper stand out is for you to have additional research, for you to have additional sources in particular that, somehow address the topic that you're supposed to be focusing on for your paper, or that might be related to it. So here we are in PsycInfo, and what I'm going to do very quickly is a search so I can pull up an article. Now in the chat, you should feel free to ask me questions. You should feel free to make comments. You should feel free to make requests. I want to show you very quickly this page. So if you notice here, so there are the different search boxes, dialog boxes, and you can do an advanced search, you can do a basic search. I'm going to do an advanced search, and you can click on link full text, references available. You can click on a wide variety of things here. What we're going to click on is peer reviewed. So peer reviewed is what we're clicking on. And what I want to find is, let's see, let's find an article. What's been in the news today? Not to bring everyone down, but school shootings. Also, I'll do school safety. And let's say school safety, elementary school. So elementary school, and let's enter teacher as a third term, and we'll see what we get. Okay, we've got 37 peer-reviewed articles. Remember, we narrowed this down. All right, so we've got different articles in front of us, and you can see the journal here listed. So International Journal of Behavior, Nutrition, Physical Activity, Create Safe Schools by Building Safe Relationships is the next one, and that's from the Journal of Applied Psychoanalytic Studies. We're going to skip that because we want something a little bit different. Psychology in Schools is our next journal. So it's School and Community Factors Involved in Chilean Students' Perceptions of School Safety. That sounds interesting. So most psychological research, so 80% of psychological research is from North America. So when we find something that's not from North America, it's kind of exciting. And there's a big move right now to sort of decolonize, shall we say, research and make research a little bit less Western focused. Which I think is a good move because we need to know more about the rest of the world. We don't talk enough about the rest of the world. Okay, so we've got this research article and it's telling us right away, research article. And the first thing we see is the title. Then we're going to see the names of the authors. The names are in order. The order doesn't necessarily mean this person did more, that person did more. Sometimes it does mean that, but in some cases, it simply is researchers who work together take turns as to whose name is going to go first. In this case, the first author, Veronica Lopez, is also what we call the corresponding author. So she's going to be the person you write to if you have questions, and you see the contact information, correspondence is right there. And we start off with the abstract. The abstract provides us with a summary of the research. And after the abstract, we have keywords. So those are going to be words we could have entered. So remember, I entered the word school safety. So this is the term that pinged sort of when I was looking things up. And then we get to the body of the article. I'm going to switch to a different screen and then I'll come back to this particular article. So our focus today, as I mentioned, is going to be on dissecting research. So we started off by looking for actual research and finding it, and we found an article on a particular topic. We did a search that was restricted to peer-reviewed. We used APA PsycInfo. APA PsycInfo should be your primary source for articles if you are a psychology student, but you can use Google Scholar and you can use other sources. It's just you want to use those with caution because in some cases the sources may not be academic, and really the best sources are going to be primary sources which are peer reviewed. Now, different types of articles, are available. So there's what we have here, a research article. That was our Chilean article, or we also call this an empirical article. And that's going to be an article that reports on the findings from scientific research. It tells you about their method. It tells you about the background of the topic. It tells you why the research was necessary. And then it tells you how we can apply that research. That is going to be the basic structure of an empirical research article. We also have a different type, which is brief reports, and those are going to be short reports that give you a quick overview of a topic. And sometimes those are usually about less than 7 pages. Review articles or literature reviews, those are secondary sources, meaning that because what they are is basically a synthesis or a gathering together of research on a particular topic. And so it's going to be someone else summarizing research. So we call that a secondary source. A primary source is if you're reading the research directly. Next, we get into policy briefs. So policy brief is going to provide information about past research and how it can be applied to a particular topic. So for example, I co-wrote a policy brief with a student in the psychology program that was on African American adolescents' mental health. And that particular article was strictly focused on policy and really giving advice on how we should approach this topic from a policy perspective. And it used a particular theoretical framework and provided a summary of relevant research. So that's what a policy brief really consists of. Then you have case conferences. So case conferences is what Freud did. So a case conference is going to provide an assessment of an individual and of how that individual, really developed or is involved, developed and presents a history of the problem the person may be having. So the first thing you see when you look at a research article is the title. Next, you see the author, then you see an abstract, then you see the keywords, and then you get into the body of the paper. Let's discuss that. So I showed you title, author, abstract. I told you a little bit about the order of the authors. I told you a little bit about the purpose of keywords. Keywords are there to help you to really find the topic. And so if you enter a particular search term, and the keywords will come up to help you find that particular article. Okay. So the introduction section of the research is also known as the background and justification, or the literature review, called informally a lit review. Now, the introduction is going to provide you with a brief background on the topic in terms of telling you what type of research has been done on the topic, why the topic is important, and why it should be studied further, particularly studied in the way you're proposing to study. Next, go through that, and usually the introduction section is going to provide a review of each variable. So you may remember this, you may not remember this from your intro classes, so I'm going to go over it very briefly. But when you're looking at research, or when you're looking at research questions, you have what we call independent variables or predictor variables, and then you have dependent variables or response variables. So if I'm asking about the relation between teacher training and children's fear in schools and how prepared children are. So how much does teachers being trained impact how safe children feel in schools? Then my predictor is going to be teacher training, and my response is going to be student fear. So then my independent variable predictor is going to be teacher training. My dependent variable or result is going to be student fear. The next thing we get into is a section called the present study or the current study. And that's going to lay out the hypothesis, the research question. And so remember, the research question really is the question you're asking about the relation between variables. The hypothesis is a prediction that's grounded in past research. So you're basically saying, based on a review of the prior literature, we predict X, Y, and Z. So again, it's not a prediction that's based on a guess. It's not we sometimes, when we learn what a hypothesis is, when we're in elementary school, we're taught that it's an educated guess. Well, in this case, it is an educated guess, but it's a guess based on research, or a prediction that's based on what's already out there. So after the present study section, we get into the method section. The method section is really the recipe for the whole project, and it tells you how they went about collecting data. It tells you who their participants were. It tells you a wide variety of information that allows you to then replicate the work that they did. In psychology, everything is fairly standardized, and that's simply because we all follow more or less the same formula for research, which is a good thing, because it means we don't have to guess, we don't have to invent terminology. Everything is already out there. So after you have the method, you're going to have the analyses or the results, and that's where we run statistical tests, or we're doing some sort of qualitative analysis where we're doing, a thematic analysis, or we could do a discourse analysis, but some way of analyzing the data that we have. And then we end the article with a discussion section, and sometimes there's a conclusion. Sometimes there's no conclusion. There's just a paragraph without conclusion, there as a heading, but sometimes there is an actual conclusion. Let me see if I can show you this on our article. So here we are. We start off with a couple of introductory paragraphs. You see they start off with a definition of what school safety is. Then they get into their variables, so school safety related factors and perceived school safety. So community related factors and perceived school safety, so school factors and community factors. So after they've done that, they go through the goals of the study, so the aims of the study, and they describe their research questions, and then they have their hypotheses. We hypothesized. You see? So that's going to be the present study section. Next, you get into the method section. So as I mentioned to you, participants come first. So they're giving a description of their sample. Remember, in psychology, we use participants. Other fields might use subjects as a terminology. And then we get into instruments and measures. And this is going to give you a summary of every single measure they use to collect data. And so you see here, they use a measure for school safety, they use a measure for social support by teachers, and they use a measure to assess victimization by peers. And this here is the Cronbach's alpha, and that's going to tell you about the reliability of the measure. So there's really specific information that is included in these particular sections. It's a description of the measure. It's going to be sample items from the measure, and they'll tell you how reliable the measure is, meaning how likely is the measure to actually be measuring what you want it to measure. And if we keep going, we next get to the procedure. So procedure, this is the step-by-step description of what they did in terms of data collection. Ethical considerations. Anytime you do research with children, you have to have some sort of focus on ethical considerations. Children are considered a vulnerable population. So there will often be, in research with children and research with other vulnerable populations. So prisoners would be a vulnerable population. Non-human animals are a vulnerable population. So all of those you require, require extra steps in terms of protection. And so those will be listed also so that when you do your research, you could duplicate this. Next section is data analysis. This is sometimes called results. And this tells you what types of tests they ran. So, actually they have a results section. So data analysis, then we get to results. And in the results section, they tell you what type of tests they ran. They are going to give you a little bit about why they ran them. And they're going to give you the actual results of why they, of what they found. So we're going to keep going. And next we get to the discussion. And this is the actual discussion of the findings. If you notice, there are numbers in the prior section. In the discussion section, you don't have numbers because what they're doing in the discussion section is they're contextualizing everything. They are connecting their data, connecting their research findings, connecting their analyses, connecting their results to what's already out there. And they're telling you how similar what they found is to prior research. And they're explaining to you the context for understanding their findings. So how is this relevant? Why is it relevant? They also tell you a bit about the contribution that their work makes, and they tell you about the limitations of their work. And that's obligatory. So if you ever are asked a question, well, what do the authors say the limitations are? You don't have to make it up. You can find it in the study itself, in the discussion section, usually towards the end of the discussion section. And then we wrap up with a concluding paragraph and with some references. So again, these references are APA style. If you look at folders in psychology program courses, you'll see an APA resource folder. There's a video in there that tells you a little bit about how to do the references. And again, when you're reading the article, you shouldn't just be reading the body of the article. You should also be looking at the references because those can come in handy. So for example, you might want to read one of the other articles that they reference so that you can, use that as part of a paper you're writing. In some cases, you might find that their references are even more relevant to your work than the actual article. So we've gone through the anatomy of a research article, but I want to give you some tips, some questions to ask yourself when you're reading, and then we'll go to questions. So when you're reading a research article, ask yourself, what topic are the researchers interested in studying? You're also going to ask yourself why the authors find this research to be important. You want to be able to identify the hypotheses. You want to be able to identify the time frame for data collection. So was data collection Longitudinal, meaning that they collected something over a long period of time. So longitudinal would be something collected over a year, something collected over 6 months, where you have time one, time two. Was it cross-sectional? So cross-sectional is going to be, let's say, if we compare elementary school students to high school students. For longitudinal research, that would be following elementary school students until they get to high school. Cross-sectional is we already have samples that are from high school and from elementary school, and we're comparing them. We're comparing two different sections of data. That's why the term is called cross-sectional. We want to be able to describe the procedures. We want to be able to describe the measures used by researchers. We also want to know what types of analyses they did. So how did they test their hypotheses? And then the question is, do the results that they found actually support the hypotheses? As I mentioned to you, they already tell you about their limitations, so that would be a weakness of the study. And then finally, one thing that we always want to know is what type of follow-up is needed. Remember that there are a wide variety of changes in terms of, what it means to be in elementary school, for example. So what it's like to be in elementary school in 2023 is not the same as what it was like to be in elementary school in 2012. What it's like to be in elementary school in the United States is not the same as what it's like to be in elementary school in Chile. So there's a wide variety of considerations, and that's why we always need more research, because we're always looking at more factors, at different factors. And on that note, I'm going to ask you if you have any questions for me. So questions, I don't see any questions in the chat, but if you have any, please post them, or you can also, raise your hand and we will call on you. But the chat really is best way. Questions? Well, if we do not have questions, then what I'll simply do is give you a little bit of advice and recommend that you reach out to me with something else. Oh, or that you reach out to me. So I typically hold career drop-in hours. So in terms of career drop-in hours, those are usually on Wednesdays at 12. So you can stop by. I'll send out the link again after spring break. You can stop by, ask me questions about what you're interested in doing career-wise. And this is primarily for psychology majors. But if you're a psychology minor, feel free to reach out also. And we can have a conversation about what you're interested in doing. We can specifically address, what path is the best one, what path is the quickest one, and I can talk to you about different options, and I can answer questions that you may sometimes not want to ask in a group setting. So you're welcome to stop by career drop-in hours. They're Wednesdays at 12, and you can also email me. So the question is, thank you so much for the question. So how many articles are typically used in a term paper? All right, so this is a tough question to answer. What I often say to my students is that there's no such thing as too many sources. You use as many as you need to have. What I would suggest is, if there's a recommendation that comes with the instructions for the paper, stick to that and then add one, because it always looks good to have extra. But it's really about keeping in mind that the more sources you have that really solidify your point, because in psychology, remember, the way we make a point is by having references to support it. So what you would like is, for example, if you're saying, and this is the example I always use, if you say the sky is blue, you don't want to just have one reference to support your point. You want to have maybe two references so that you can say, look, these two scholars found that the sky is blue. I know that sounds silly, but again, research is how we make our points in psychology and the social sciences. So if you're sociology, if you're disability studies, if you're youth studies, we make our points through research. And so we use research to support the points. I would say a minimum of articles would be, sometimes it would be between 8 and 10. That's a minimum. But what I should tell you is that when I was a student, I had papers where I had 5 pages of references, and this is when I was an undergrad. So the paper itself would be maybe 15 pages long, and then I'd have 5 pages of references. And again, you're free to reach out to me. Is there a limit on how many articles? Thank you so much for the question. And there is no limit on how many articles unless there's a word limit or a page limit. So let's say, for example, you have a 20-page limit. So when you have a 20-page limit, you want to stay within that limit. You don't want to say to yourself, oh, I can do extra. It's perfectly fine to reach out to your professor and say, does that 20-page limit include references? And in that case, if the professor says it does include references, you still want to stick to that. What I often say to students is that if you submit if it's a 20-page paper and you submit 20 and a half pages, I stop reading at 20 at the end of the 20th page. I don't go to the next page. But in other cases, I might go to the next page because there's more flexibility. But in psychology, for example, we have very strict word limits. And so we typically, will stay within that limit. So it's always about staying within whatever guidelines and limits are imposed. And there's no such thing as too many references, so to speak, unless you have so many references that they just look like filler. Because very often you can make your point with 2 or 3 supporting references. You don't need 5. Okay, so again, if there are no other questions, I want to encourage you to reach out to me. My email is in the chat, isabel.alicia@cuny.edu, and I will have drop-in hours again after spring break. I do not have them this week or next week, but I want to wish you the very best of luck with the rest of the semester, since we won't meet again for Lunch and Learn until next semester, and email me if you have questions. Thank you so much, Valerie, for joining us, and thank you, Casey. You're such a wonderful presence in these meetings, and thank you to everyone else, and have a very good rest of the semester if I do not see you or if you do not hear from me. So I'm going to wish you well, and we will be in touch. So bye, everyone.